Welcome back to Family Secrets Unveiled, where we peer into the darkest corners of human history and the tangled knots of fate. Sometimes, the most innocent things, a child's toy, a faded photograph, or today's focus, a simple melody, can be the key that unlocks a terrifying, forgotten past. What if the song your mother sang to you, the lullaby that was the very fabric of your earliest, safest memories, wasn't hers at all? What if that gentle, soothing tune belonged to someone else? Someone who, perhaps, never got to sing it to their own child. Meet Elara Vance, a woman in her late 40s, living a life of carefully curated normalcy in a quiet New Jersey suburb. Elara was an architect, precise, logical, a woman who built her life brick by sturdy brick. But 2 years ago, the very foundations of her reality began to tremble. It wasn't a sudden, dramatic earthquake. It was a slow, insidious vibration, starting with the quiet hum of a tune she couldn't place. She'd recently become a grandmother. Her daughter, Chloe, had just given birth to a boy, Leo. One afternoon, Elara was rocking little Leo, struggling to quiet his fussy cries. Instinct took over, the muscle memory of motherhood overriding her conscious thought. A melody slipped from her lips, an ancient, melancholic tune, simple and repetitive, with a strange, almost liturgical cadence. It wasn't Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. It was her lullaby, the one her mother, Serafina, had always sung, the one that smelled of lavender and old lace and felt like the safest place in the world. But this time, as she hummed, a shiver traced down her spine. The melody didn't feel safe. It felt wrong. It carried a weight, a heavy, cold echo of sorrow she'd never noticed before. Chloe, watching from the doorway, whispered, "Mom, what is that song? It's beautiful, but so sad. You never sang that to me." Elara stopped, the song dying in her throat. "What do you mean, Chloe?" "Of course I did. It's the one Serafina sang to me. It's our song." Chloe shook her head. "No, Mom. You always sang Hush Little Baby. I'd know that melody anywhere. I've heard you sing this one a few times recently, only since Leo was born. It's different." That small, seemingly harmless discrepancy was the first crack in the facade. Elara, the logical architect, dismissed it. Maternal forgetfulness, she reasoned. The stress of being a new grandmother. But the song had taken root in her mind, a quiet, insistent seed of doubt. Over the next few weeks, she became obsessed. She tried to ask her mother, Serafina, about the song, but Serafina, now in her late 70s and suffering from early-stage dementia, could only offer confused, fragmented replies. The song? Oh, the pretty song. It came from far away, Elara. A long, long time ago. The more Elara hummed it, the more she noticed a strange physical reaction. Her pulse would quicken. A faint, almost sickly sweet scent of camphor and sea salt would fill the air, a scent that shouldn't be there, living nowhere near the ocean. And the lyrics, the few fragmented words she could recall, were not English. They were a melodic, guttural language she couldn't identify, something that sounded like a whisper from the Baltic Sea. One sleepless night, driven by a nameless compulsion, Elara dug through her mother's ancient cedar chest, a trunk Serafina had always kept locked, claiming it held nothing but old papers. Inside, beneath a pile of moth-eaten shawls, she found it, a small, tarnished silver locket. It was engraved with the initials IK and inside, 2 sepia photographs. One was of a handsome, dark-haired man in a military uniform from the 1940s. The other was of a young woman, not Serafina, but someone startlingly similar. A woman with Elara's own piercing green eyes, only younger, her expression etched with a profound, almost terrifying sorrow. But the real shock wasn't the locket. Tucked into the velvet lining was a brittle, yellowed piece of sheet music. The notes were faded, almost illegible, but the melody was unmistakable. It was the lullaby. And scrawled beneath the music, in a delicate, unfamiliar script, was a single word that sent a shockwave of dread through Elara's heart: Ilsa. The song wasn't a family heirloom. It was a relic. A ghostly echo of a life Serafina had never mentioned, tied to a name Ilsa and a face that mirrored Elara's own. It was a secret, hidden not just from the world, but from the very woman who had carried that melody into the present. Elara realized then, her mother hadn't composed the lullaby, she had inherited it, or perhaps stolen it. And the dark, sorrowful weight of the tune was the burden of a decades-old, buried crime. This seemingly innocent, comforting song was, in fact, the first step into a world of hidden identities, wartime shadows, and a secret that still breathed, a secret that now threatened to consume Elara's carefully constructed life. The melody had been passed down, and with it, the truth, waiting for the one person who would finally listen to its silent, desperate cry. The discovery of the locket and the sheet music, the name Ilsa, didn't just unsettle Elara, it plunged her into a frantic, obsessive quest for truth. The rhythmic, haunting repetition of the lullaby in her mind became the soundtrack to her unraveling. She couldn't focus on her architectural designs. The clean lines of her blueprints were constantly overlaid with the faded, brittle image of Ilsa's face. She tried to confront Serafina again, holding the locket in her trembling hand. "Mother, who is Ilsa? Whose song is this?" Serafina's response was a terrifying blend of lucidity and madness. Her eyes, usually clouded by dementia, focused sharply on the locket, a flicker of pure terror crossing her features. She snatched the locket, her grip surprisingly strong, and screamed, "Put it away. The sea will take it back. She's quiet now. Let her stay quiet." Then, just as quickly, the panic vanished, replaced by a vacant smile. "Did I tell you about the lavender? Such a lovely scent." The reaction confirmed Elara's worst fear. The song and the locket were not just old memories, they were connected to a primal, buried trauma. Her mother was not simply forgetful, she was protecting a secret, one so potent it could momentarily puncture the fog of her illness. Elara knew she couldn't rely on Serafina for answers. She needed facts, dates, and places. The uniform in the locket photo suggested Europe, the 1940s. The melodic language of the lullaby, with its harsh consonants and deep vowels, finally led her to a breakthrough. She uploaded an audio recording of herself humming the tune to an online linguistic forum. The answer came back quickly from a user specializing in rare dialects. It was an archaic form of Lithuanian folk music, specifically a Lopsine lullaby, from the coastal region of Klaipėda, a territory hotly contested during World War II. Lithuania. The Baltic Sea. The camphor and sea salt scent. It all began to coalesce into a chilling image, a life lived not in suburban New Jersey, but amidst the brutal chaos of a war-torn coast. Elara focused on the initials on the locket, Ike Ilsa. Klaipėda. She hired a private investigator, a former journalist named Marcus Kroll, who specialized in tracing World War II-era missing persons. She showed him the photos, the sheet music, and recounted her mother's terrifying outburst. Marcus, a man hardened by decades of dealing with family ghosts, was instantly intrigued. "This isn't just a story, Elara," he said, his voice grave. "This is an artifact. A soul in a box." Marcus's initial research unearthed a startling fact. Serafina Vance's official records, her birth certificate, immigration papers, even her marriage license, were impeccably clean, dating her existence back to her arrival in the U.S. in 1952 as a young, unaccompanied woman from a displaced persons camp in Germany. But the details were sparse, too perfect. There were no siblings listed, no verifiable pre-war history. It was a blank slate, expertly scrubbed clean. Then came the first real breakthrough, a terrifying twist that pushed Elara to the brink. Marcus cross-referenced the unique musical pattern of the lullaby with archived police and military reports from the Klaipėda region in the late 1940s. He found a single, faint record, a brief, almost ignored police report concerning a young woman named Ilsa Kovas, a local music teacher, who had vanished in 1949, leaving behind an infant daughter. The report noted a distinguishing feature. Ilsa Kovas had an unusually shaped, distinctive birthmark, a tiny, star-shaped cluster of moles, just behind her left ear. Elara felt the blood drain from her face. She knew that mark. It was the same small, star-shaped cluster of moles she had inherited, the one she had always dismissed as a quirk of genetics. But there was more. Marcus dug deeper into the DP camp records. He found the intake form for Elara Vance, dated 1952. Beneath the official stamp, a nurse's handwritten note mentioned a child traveling with Serafina, a 3-year-old girl named Elara. The record stated the girl was Serafina's biological daughter. However, the date of birth listed for little Elara on the DP camp form was 3 years earlier than the date on her American birth certificate. A deliberate discrepancy. And more chillingly, the record noted the child had a distinctive birthmark behind the left ear. The pieces slammed together with brutal force. Her mother, Serafina, was a living lie. The woman Elara called Mother had arrived in America with a stolen identity and a stolen child. Elara wasn't Serafina's daughter. She was Ilsa's daughter. The woman whose face mirrored her own, the woman whose song had haunted her subconscious, was her biological mother, and she had vanished. The horrifying implication hung in the air, heavy and noxious. Serafina had not merely adopted Elara, she had taken her, adopted her name, and meticulously erased a life. But why? The lullaby, the only relic of Ilsa's life, wasn't just a sentimental tune, it was a desperate clue. It was Ilsa Kova's, through the only language she could still speak, reaching across decades to find the child who should have been hers. Elara's world didn't just tremble, it shattered. Her entire identity was a footnote in someone else's unfinished tragedy, a consequence of a violent secret Serafina had carried for 50 years. The mystery wasn't about a forgotten song, it was about a stolen soul, and the question now was, what happened to Ilsa? And how deep did Serafina's betrayal go? The revelation that Elara was Ilsa's daughter, a stolen child, transformed the investigation from a cold case into a deeply personal, terrifying confrontation. The logical architect was replaced by a wounded, vengeful daughter, driven by a need to reclaim the truth of her lineage. The lullaby no longer sounded like a lament, it was a drumbeat of war, driving her forward. Elara knew the only person who held the final, crucial piece of the puzzle was Serafina. She decided to stage a final, dramatic confrontation, not to terrorize her mother, but to exploit a fleeting moment of lucidity. She brought Serafina to her childhood home, the quiet, safe house that was now a cage of lies. She placed the locket, the sheet music, and a blown-up copy of Ilsa Kova's missing person report on the kitchen table. The star-shaped birthmark was circled in red. "Look, Mother," Elara said, her voice dangerously calm. "I know. Ilsa Kova's. IK. The song is hers. I am her daughter. You took me. You took her life, and you took mine. Tell me what happened in Klaipeda in 1949. Tell me where my mother is." Serafina, initially resistant, became volatile. She began to rock and whisper the lullaby, not the soothing version, but a frantic, gasping rendition. Suddenly, she stopped, her eyes clearing entirely, focused with the piercing clarity of a desperate soul. This was the moment. The fog of dementia had lifted, and the sheer, raw terror of 50 years was etched onto her face. "He made me do it, Elara," Serafina hissed, the words tumbling out like jagged stones. "Not me. Him." The song, it wasn't the sea taking her, it was him. She revealed the shocking truth. Serafina was Ilsa's younger sister, not a stranger. Her real name was Inga. They were inseparable, bound by the brutal realities of wartime survival in the fractured Lithuanian coast. Ilsa, the older sister, was a vibrant, fiercely protective soul who had fallen in love with a resistance fighter, the man in the military uniform from the locket, a man named Kestas. He was also IK. In 1949, Kestas was betrayed and executed. Ilsa, distraught, gave birth to Elara shortly after. Inga, Serafina, was secretly in love with Kestas herself. She had always lived in Ilsa's shadow, consumed by a venomous cocktail of envy, unrequited love, and the desperate need for a better life, a life she felt Ilsa didn't deserve after Kestas's death. The confrontation came one stormy night on the coast. Inga, bitter and seeing an opportunity, discovered Ilse's plan to flee to the west with the infant Elara. A brutal argument erupted. Inga, in a fit of jealous rage fueled by despair and the fear of being left behind, shoved Ilse. Ilse fell, hitting her head on a jagged rock near the water's edge. She didn't die instantly. As Ilse lay dying, bleeding out, she used her last breath to sing the lullaby, her final, desperate message to her sister, forcing Inga to memorize it, a silent, terrible witness to the crime. Inga, horrified but seeing an immediate, twisted opportunity, took the child, the locket, and the sheet music. She assumed Ilse's identity, or a variant of it, Serafina, and used Ilse's contacts to secure passage to a DP camp. She erased Ilse, but she couldn't erase the song. The lullaby became Inga's penance, a curse she had to repeat every night to the stolen child, a constant, private reminder of her sister's final, silent accusation. The ultimate betrayal, the comforting, familiar tune was not a relic of love, but a bloody promise. The conflict reached its terrifying peak when Serafina/Inga, overwhelmed by the decades of guilt and the sudden, complete breaking of her sanity, suddenly lunged for Elara. "You will never know. You belong to me," she screamed, her eyes wild, clutching the locket. The resulting struggle was brief but devastating. The locket flew across the room, shattering against the wall. The two women fell, and the impact momentarily stunned Serafina. Elara, reeling from the horrific truth, her mother was her aunt, her father was executed, and her true mother was murdered by the woman who raised her, looked down at Serafina. The woman who had given her a life was also the one who had taken a life, a beautiful, vibrant one, just to possess a child and a future. Elara didn't call the police immediately. She sat there, the lullaby echoing in the silent room, a melody of murder and betrayal. The ultimate twist was that the secret wasn't about who Elara was, but about who Serafina wasn't. The woman who had hidden the truth for 50 years was now just a shell, her false identity stripped bare. The silence that followed was heavier than any storm, confirming that the lullaby had finally delivered its deadly message. The confrontation in the kitchen was the inevitable, brutal climax of the decades-long lie. Serafina's sudden, raw confession, a brief flicker of true memory before the fog returned, was enough. Elara finally had the full truth, but the victory was hollow. The woman who murdered her mother was the only mother she had ever known, a cruel paradox that left her emotionally shattered. Elara's final choice was the most agonizing. She did not immediately call the police. Serafina, after the outburst, collapsed into a state of catatonia, her mind completely receding into the safety of advanced dementia. The murder, committed 50 years ago in a war-torn country, was now protected by the irreversible decay of the mind. An arrest would mean a trial, a spectacle, and the final, brutal destruction of the Serafina Vance identity, which, despite everything, was still the only mother her daughter Chloe knew, and the only grandmother Leo would ever meet. Instead, Elara chose a different form of justice, one dictated by the lullaby itself. She chose to reclaim Ilse, the lost mother. Elara contacted Marcus Kroll again, now a confidant and ally. They used the sheet music and Serafina's confession to launch an international effort to find Ilse's remains. After months of painstaking, quiet work, they narrowed the location based on Inga's description of the shoreline near Klaipeda. The local authorities, intrigued by the cold case, assisted. Finally, near a rugged, hidden cove, they found them. A few fragments of bone, and next to them, a small, rusted anchor pin, the kind Kestisa's resistance unit was known to wear. Elara flew to Lithuania. She buried her mother's remains in a small, peaceful cemetery overlooking the Baltic Sea, the same sea Ilse had once longed to cross. It was a private ceremony, attended only by Elara and Marcus. As the priest offered his final words, Elara took out the brittle sheet music. She sang the Lopsine one last time, not as a burden, not as a curse, but as the final, pure act of a daughter honoring her mother. This time, the melody wasn't melancholy. It was one of release, a quiet affirmation that Ilse's message had been received, and her soul could finally rest. Serafina/Inga lived out her remaining years in a high-end care facility, secure but silent. She never spoke another coherent word. Elara visited her every week, not out of love, but out of a terrible, complex sense of duty. She never revealed the truth to Chloe. The lie was too large, the potential collateral damage too great. She had reclaimed her own truth, and for the sake of her daughter's peace, she chose to let the public identity of Elara Vance remain intact. The architecture of her life was rebuilt, not on lies, but on a hidden, solid foundation of truth. Elara returned to New Jersey, a changed woman. She still hummed the lullaby to little Leo, but now, when she sang it, she felt not the scent of sea salt and camphor, but the warm, protective embrace of Ilsa Kovas, the architect of her true identity. She learned to live with the duality, a daughter of Serafina in the light and a daughter of Ilsa in the shadows. The song was her secret covenant, a silent promise to the mother she never knew that her life had not been lost in vain. And that, my friends, is where we leave the story of Elara Vance and the lullaby that wasn't hers, but became the only honest piece of her legacy. It's a chilling reminder that the deepest, darkest secrets aren't always buried in the ground. Sometimes they're hidden in the notes of a song, passed from generation to generation, waiting for the one person brave enough to listen to the whisper of the dead. We've covered a lot of ground today, peeling back the layers of a 50-year-old betrayal, a stolen identity, and a mother's final, silent message. If this deep dive into the hidden truths of family history has resonated with you, if you found yourself holding your breath as Elara faced her past, then please do us a huge favor. Hit that like button, subscribe to Family Secrets Unveiled so you don't miss any of our explorations into the macabre corners of history, and ring that notification bell so you're the first to know when a new secret is unearthed. Until next time, keep your eyes open and listen closely to the whispers in the dark.